Before starting the video, we would like to ask for your subscription and your like so that we can keep the channel active, the new channel, and not have so many followers, and this will help us keep the channel active. Subscribe to help us create more historical videos for you. The story of David McCampbell begins not with a man of war, but with a man of vision. Born on January 16, 1910, in Bessemer, Alabama, McCampbell grew up in a post-World War I America where aviation was just beginning to find its wings. As a young boy, he was fascinated by flying machines, their grace and noise and power capturing his imagination. By the time he entered adolescence, the naval service had already become a calling. He entered the United States Naval Academy in 1929 and graduated in 1933, but the early years of his career were not as smooth as the legend that followed. After being commissioned as an ensign, he found himself without a ship due to post-depression cutbacks and even briefly returned home before being recalled. It was not until 1938 that he earned his wings as a naval aviator, marking the true beginning of a career that would shape naval aviation forever. By the time World War II began for the United States in December 1941, McCampbell was already an experienced pilot and leader. However, his true fame would emerge not until 1944. Before that, he served aboard the aircraft carrier USS Wasp, CV-7, which was eventually sunk in September 1942 during operations in the Solomon Islands. McCampbell survived and was reassigned, soon becoming commander of Air Group 15, CAG-15, an elite air unit aboard the USS Essex, CV-9. With this new command came new responsibility, and eventually, legend. Air Group 15 was a powerful force, consisting of McCampbell's own F-6F Hellcat fighters, along with dive bombers and torpedo planes. What made McCampbell so effective was not just his skill in the air but his ability to inspire and lead men under extreme pressure. He was calm, methodical, and precise. He taught his men to stay alert, fly smart, and remain aggressive without being reckless. His approach yielded staggering results. Under his command, Air Group 15 became one of the most successful units of the Pacific War, credited with more than 300 aerial victories, 200 aircraft destroyed on the ground, and the sinking of more than 40 ships. McCampbell's first air-to-air kill came during the campaign in the Marianas in mid-1944. From that point on, he would not only become the top Navy ace of World War II, but he would go on to set records that have never been broken in naval aviation history. Flying the Grumman F-6F Hellcat, a rugged, heavily armed fighter designed to outmatch the Japanese Zero, he used its superior firepower and diving speed to deadly effect. The Hellcat's 6.50 caliber machine guns and excellent visibility gave McCampbell the tools he needed to dominate the skies. One of his most notable achievements occurred during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, sometimes referred to as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, due to the massive losses suffered by Japanese naval aviation. On June 19, 1944, McCampbell scrambled into action as wave after wave of Japanese aircraft tried to break through the U.S. fleet's fighter screen. On that day alone, McCampbell shot down 7 enemy aircraft in a single mission, a feat that made him an instant legend. What made this achievement even more remarkable was the fact that his aircraft was running low on fuel and ammunition by the time he returned. Every shot counted. Every decision mattered. As the Pacific War continued, so did McCampbell's relentless success. He became known not just for his tactical brilliance but for his courage. He regularly volunteered for missions that carried high risk, and his aggressive tactics often meant he was flying in the thickest part of the battle. One of the most daring engagements occurred on October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. That morning, as the U.S. fleet faced a large Japanese carrier force off the coast of the Philippines, McCampbell and his wingmen launched to intercept. Only 2 aircraft against an incoming group of over 60 Japanese planes. It was a near-suicidal mission, but McCampbell did not hesitate. In the 90-minute dogfight that followed, McCampbell shot down 9 enemy planes, a record for a single mission by a U.S. Navy pilot. His wingmen added another 7. The engagement was chaotic and deadly, but McCampbell's Hellcat proved lethal in his hands. Despite ammunition running critically low and the odds overwhelmingly against him, he maintained his composure and focus. When he landed back aboard the Essex, his aircraft had nearly no ammunition left, and he had used every ounce of fuel. The mission earned him the Medal of Honor, presented by President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself. His official citation spoke of extraordinary heroism and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. He had become a symbol of what naval aviators aspired to be. Before starting the video, we would like to ask for your subscription and your like so that we can keep the channel active, the new channel, and not have so many followers, and this will help us keep the channel active. Subscribe to help us create more historical videos for you. The story of David McCampbell begins not with a man of war, but with a man of vision. Born on January 16, 1910, in Bessemer, Alabama, McCampbell grew up in a post-World War I America where aviation was just beginning to find its wings. As a young boy, he was fascinated by flying machines, their grace and noise and power capturing his imagination. By the time he entered adolescence, the naval service had already become a calling. He entered the United States Naval Academy in 1929 and graduated in 1933, but the early years of his career were not as smooth as the legend that followed. After being commissioned as an ensign, he found himself without a ship due to post-depression cutbacks and even briefly returned home before being recalled. It was not until 1938 that he earned his wings as a naval aviator, marking the true beginning of a career that would shape naval aviation forever. By the time World War II began for the United States in December 1941, McCampbell was already an experienced pilot and leader. However, his true fame would emerge not until 1944. Before that, he served aboard the aircraft carrier USS Wasp, CV-7, which was eventually sunk in September 1942 during operations in the Solomon Islands. McCampbell survived and was reassigned, soon becoming commander of Air Group 15, CAG-15, an elite air unit aboard the USS Essex, CV-9. With this new command came new responsibility, and eventually, legend. Air Group 15 was a powerful force, consisting of McCampbell's own F-6F Hellcat fighters, along with dive bombers and torpedo planes. What made McCampbell so effective was not just his skill in the air but his ability to inspire and lead men under extreme pressure. He was calm, methodical, and precise. He taught his men to stay alert, fly smart, and remain aggressive without being reckless. His approach yielded staggering results. Under his command, Air Group 15 became one of the most successful units of the Pacific War, credited with more than 300 aerial victories, 200 aircraft destroyed on the ground, and the sinking of more than 40 ships. McCampbell's first air-to-air kill came during the campaign in the Marianas in mid-1944. From that point on, he would not only become the top Navy ace of World War II, but he would go on to set records that have never been broken in naval aviation history. Flying the Grumman F-6F Hellcat, a rugged, heavily armed fighter designed to outmatch the Japanese Zero, he used its superior firepower and diving speed to deadly effect. The Hellcat's 6.50 caliber machine guns and excellent visibility gave McCampbell the tools he needed to dominate the skies. One of his most notable achievements occurred during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, sometimes referred to as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, due to the massive losses suffered by Japanese naval aviation. On June 19, 1944, McCampbell scrambled into action as wave after wave of Japanese aircraft tried to break through the U.S. fleet's fighter screen. On that day alone, McCampbell shot down 7 enemy aircraft in a single mission, a feat that made him an instant legend. What made this achievement even more remarkable was the fact that his aircraft was running low on fuel and ammunition by the time he returned. Every shot counted. Every decision mattered. As the Pacific War continued, so did McCampbell's relentless success. He became known not just for his tactical brilliance but for his courage. He regularly volunteered for missions that carried high risk, and his aggressive tactics often meant he was flying in the thickest part of the battle. One of the most daring engagements occurred on October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. That morning, as the U.S. fleet faced a large Japanese carrier force off the coast of the Philippines, McCampbell and his wingmen launched to intercept. Only 2 aircraft against an incoming group of over 60 Japanese planes. It was a near-suicidal mission, but McCampbell did not hesitate. In the 90-minute dogfight that followed, McCampbell shot down 9 enemy planes, a record for a single mission by a U.S. Navy pilot. His wingman added another 7. The engagement was chaotic and deadly, but McCampbell's Hellcat proved lethal in his hands. Despite ammunition running critically low and the odds overwhelmingly against him, he maintained his composure and focus. When he landed back aboard the Essex, his aircraft had nearly no ammunition left, and he had used every ounce of fuel. The mission earned him the Medal of Honor, presented by President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself. His official citation spoke of extraordinary heroism and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. He had become a symbol of what naval aviators aspired to be. But what drove McCampbell wasn't glory. He never saw himself as a hero. He viewed himself as a naval officer doing his duty. He emphasized training, discipline, and preparation. While others sought the adrenaline of combat, he sought results and effectiveness. His leadership style was quiet but firm. He expected the best from his pilots and gave the same in return. His respect among his men was built not just on his combat record but on the way he carried himself both in the air and on deck. He knew that every man under his command had a life worth fighting for, and he acted accordingly. By the end of his combat tour, McCampbell had flown 131 missions and participated in more than 20 air battles. He had shot down 34 enemy planes, making him the highest-scoring U.S. Navy fighter ace in history. But more than the numbers, it was the way he fought and led that cemented his legacy. He brought a sense of strategy, calm, and overwhelming determination to his role. Unlike some aces who chased personal glory, McCampbell always kept the larger mission in mind, protecting his carrier, supporting amphibious landings, and taking out enemy air power before it could strike. His influence went beyond the cockpit. As the war neared its end, McCampbell was promoted and returned stateside, where he continued serving in various naval roles, including flight training and command positions. The respect he earned in battle followed him into peacetime service. He eventually retired as a captain in 1964, closing out a long and distinguished career that had begun in the interwar years and helped shape the course of naval aviation through some of its most challenging tests. Yet despite all the medals, honors, and citations, among them the Medal of Honor, the Navy Cross, and the Distinguished Flying Cross, McCampbell remained humble. In interviews and public appearances, he often deflected praise and gave credit to his fellow pilots and crew. He believed that success in war was never the result of a single man but of teamwork, discipline, and shared sacrifice. His philosophy was one of unity, of fighting for something greater than oneself. His name would become etched in the annals of American history alongside other great aces of the war, yet his place among naval aviators was unique. He was the embodiment of what a combat leader should be: disciplined, brave, tactically sound, and always thinking of the mission first. His 34 kills were not merely a scorecard, they were a reflection of an era when air combat was at its deadliest and most personal. McCampbell stood at the pinnacle of that world. David McCampbell's legacy grew not only through his unmatched aerial victories but also through the example he set as a leader and mentor. After the conclusion of his historic combat tour in the Pacific, McCampbell's experience became a vital asset to the U.S. Navy's evolving aviation doctrine. The Navy understood that his first-hand knowledge of fighter tactics, formation discipline, and aerial engagement under pressure could not be wasted. He returned to the United States not to rest but to train a new generation of naval aviators who would carry the burden of the war's final year and the uncertain future beyond. Back on American soil, McCampbell was seen as both a living legend and a humble teacher. The contrast between his status as the Navy's leading ace and his quiet, deliberate personality surprised many who met him for the first time. He did not speak in grandiose terms about his victories, nor did he brag about his accomplishments. Instead, he used his time in the States to pass on tactical knowledge and encourage responsibility among young pilots. For McCampbell, winning dogfights was not about luck or showmanship, it was about calculated action, superior positioning, and the will to strike hard and survive. He was frequently invited to speak at training schools and appeared before classes of cadets preparing for deployment. At these events, McCampbell focused on discipline and preparation. He believed the key to success in combat was understanding your aircraft better than your enemy understood his, staying calm even in chaos, and flying with purpose. He taught the importance of watching your wingman, listening to your instincts, and never underestimating an enemy, even if they seemed outmatched. In his mind, every aerial victory was earned through mental toughness as much as technical skill. McCampbell also worked directly with engineering officers and flight instructors to refine training protocols based on his experiences with the Hellcat in the Pacific. He pushed for more realistic gunnery drills and emphasized the importance of fuel management, situational awareness, and communication during air combat. His influence helped transform naval aviation instruction from a theoretical practice into one based on real combat scenarios. He knew firsthand what it was like to return from battle with nearly empty tanks and only a few rounds left in the guns, and he didn't want future pilots to face that without preparation. Even though he was no longer on the front lines, McCampbell remained closely connected to his old unit. He wrote letters of encouragement, followed their missions, and provided guidance to those who had taken his place in combat. His sense of duty did not end with his last dogfight. It continued in every piece of advice he offered and every pilot he helped shape. To many of the aviators who came through training during that time, McCampbell was more than a war hero. He was a model of what it meant to be a naval officer, brave, intelligent, and always thinking of others. After the war officially ended in 1945, McCampbell transitioned into a series of strategic and administrative roles within the Navy. His leadership was highly valued, and he was promoted to higher levels of command, eventually taking responsibility for carrier operations and fleet air readiness. While he missed flying combat missions, he understood that leadership sometimes meant helping others fly instead. His insights into how aircraft carriers functioned in wartime, and the coordination required between flight decks and strike groups, made him a trusted voice in post-war naval planning. Despite all the progress made during the war, McCampbell knew the challenges of the future would be different. The rise of jet propulsion, missile technology, and changing doctrines of air and sea power meant that the Navy had to evolve quickly. McCampbell adapted, studying new aircraft, engaging with engineers, and ensuring that the spirit of what made him a successful pilot, calm under pressure, total understanding of one's aircraft, and teamwork, would carry into the jet age. He may have been a product of the propeller era, but his mind was never stuck in the past. He continued serving actively into the 1950s, stationed at various bases and working with carrier groups that represented the new face of American naval power. While others struggled to adapt to the rapid changes of post-war aviation, McCampbell remained open-minded. He viewed new technologies as tools, not replacements for pilot skill and discipline. He advocated for pilot training programs that emphasized both technical expertise and the mental fortitude required to survive and succeed in combat. One of McCampbell's most significant post-war contributions was in shaping naval air readiness during the early Cold War period. As the threat of global conflict once again loomed, this time between the United States and the Soviet Union, the Navy needed leaders who understood how to manage aircraft carriers, fighter squadrons, and nuclear-capable assets in an increasingly volatile world. McCampbell took on staff roles that focused on strategic planning and aviation logistics. He was a thinker and planner as much as he had once been a shooter. Throughout the 1950s and into the early 1960s, he served aboard several carriers and eventually assumed command of USS Bonhomme Richard, CV-31, a position that allowed him to implement many of the philosophies he had developed over 2 decades of flying, fighting, and leading. As a commanding officer, McCampbell was deeply respected for his fairness, attention to detail, and ability to balance tradition with innovation. He maintained high expectations for performance, but he never asked anything of his crew that he hadn't once done himself. In 1964, after more than 3 decades of service, David McCampbell retired from the United States Navy with the rank of captain. His career had taken him from the flight decks of World War II aircraft carriers to the nerve centers of Cold War strategy, and through it all, he remained true to his core values. Discipline, courage, humility, and a relentless commitment to excellence defined him until the day he stepped away from the uniform. But even in retirement, he continued to support veterans, speak to young aviators, and offer his time to those who sought to understand the air war in the Pacific and what it took to survive it. McCampbell's post-service life was marked by quiet dignity. He settled in Florida, where he stayed active in veteran communities and occasionally appeared at air shows, commemorative events, and naval reunions. Pilots who had grown up reading about his dogfights now lined up to meet the man who had lived through them. They were rarely disappointed. McCampbell was generous with his time, thoughtful in his stories, and always gave credit to those who had fought beside him. He knew that war was not about individual glory, it was about men and women working together, often under impossible conditions, to achieve something greater than themselves. Despite his reputation, McCampbell never saw himself as invincible. He often talked about luck, timing, and the importance of good training. He knew many great pilots who didn't make it home, and he carried that weight with him. In interviews, he would sometimes pause when recalling lost friends, his voice steady but soft. The war had forged him, but it had also left scars. He didn't glorify it. He respected it. And he reminded others to do the same. As the years passed, McCampbell's name became synonymous with naval aviation excellence. He was inducted into numerous halls of fame and received awards for his contributions to air power and national defense. Aircraft carriers and squadrons were named in his honor. Yet even with all the accolades, McCampbell remained a modest man. He lived simply, avoided the spotlight, and stayed focused on what truly mattered: service, legacy, and honor. In the 1980s and early 1990s, McCampbell's story saw a resurgence in public interest, as historians and military scholars re-examined the Pacific Theater and the role of naval aviation in winning the war. Documentaries, books, and academic studies frequently featured him as the embodiment of the Navy fighter pilot. Young people discovering the war for the first time saw him not just as a historical figure but as a symbol of American resolve and courage under fire. He became more than a pilot, he became an icon. Yet those closest to him, his family, friends, and fellow veterans, never saw him change. He remained the same grounded individual who had taken off from the deck of the USS Essex decades earlier, always focused on doing his job and protecting his fellow sailors. He continued to write letters, support memorial projects, and advise naval leadership even in his final years. His contributions went far beyond his 34 aerial victories. They lived in the lives he influenced, the Navy he helped shape, and the enduring values he left behind. The memory of David McCampbell's wartime exploits continued to inspire generations of aviators long after he left the cockpit. His most famous engagements, including the dogfights over the Marianas and the Philippines, became case studies in tactical precision, daring initiative, and pure tenacity. Naval flight schools used recordings, diagrams, and mission analyses of his battles to teach pilots the importance of energy management, positioning, and the critical need for communication in squadron formations. His 9-victory flight on October 24, 1944, became a legend not just for the extraordinary kill count, but for the fact that it encapsulated everything McCampbell believed in: calculated aggression, superior situational awareness, and unshakable calm under fire. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat that carried McCampbell to immortality was itself a machine built for dominance. Designed as a direct answer to the Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0, the Hellcat was faster in a dive, sturdier in a dogfight, and easier to maintain on the flight decks of carriers. In McCampbell's hands, the aircraft reached its full potential. He often spoke of the Hellcat with affection and respect, praising its rugged design and forgiving handling. He understood that no pilot, no matter how skilled, could succeed without an aircraft that could match his instincts. The bond between man and machine was absolute, and McCampbell respected that relationship deeply. One aspect of McCampbell's story that is often overlooked is the mental burden he carried as a squadron leader. Every time he launched from the Essex, he knew that the lives of the pilots under his command could hinge on the decisions he made in seconds. When to attack, when to disengage, which formations to fly, these choices were not just theoretical. They were the difference between life and death. McCampbell took that responsibility seriously. He would often spend hours after missions reviewing gun camera footage, debriefing pilots, and ensuring that every lesson was captured. He wasn't just focused on winning the war, he wanted to bring his men home. His leadership extended beyond the skies. On the carrier, he was known for being approachable and even-tempered. He didn't shout or intimidate. He led by example, setting high standards and living by them. Pilots trusted him not only because of his kill record but because of the way he treated them. He valued every man in his group, from the youngest ensign to the most seasoned ace. In turn, they gave him loyalty, admiration, and a commitment to fly harder and smarter than anyone else. This bond between commander and squadron created a unit cohesion that few could rival. In many ways, McCampbell's legacy was as much about unity as it was about individual prowess. He showed that great leadership in combat meant staying composed in chaos, sharing success with your team, and always being prepared for the unexpected. These values helped define naval aviation in World War II and shape the doctrine that would guide it for decades. His combat record may have drawn the headlines, but it was his ability to build and lead elite squadrons that truly set him apart. His service aboard the USS Essex was not without its moments of danger outside of aerial combat. Like all carriers in the Pacific, the Essex was a target for enemy submarines, kamikazes, and air raids. McCampbell knew that every time he launched, the ship itself was vulnerable. That knowledge made his job even more critical. By intercepting and destroying incoming threats, he wasn't just fighting for air superiority, he was defending every soul on board. This responsibility drove him to be relentless in the air. Every Japanese plane shot down was one less chance for the enemy to strike his shipmates. McCampbell's efforts during the Philippines campaign were instrumental in crippling Japanese air power. As the U.S. forces moved to retake the islands, carrier groups faced stiff resistance. Waves of enemy fighters and bombers tried to halt the American advance. Day after day, McCampbell and his pilots launched into the skies to push them back. The pressure was constant. The stakes were enormous. But under McCampbell's guidance, Air Group 15 delivered devastating results. The skies over Leyte Gulf, Sibuyan Sea, and Cape Engano bore witness to some of the most ferocious air combat of the war. In those battles, McCampbell became more than an ace, he became a symbol of dominance. Despite the physical and emotional toll of continuous combat, McCampbell never lost his sense of duty. Even when he had already achieved a kill count high enough to secure his place in history, he kept flying, kept leading, kept pushing. Some questioned why he continued to fly at all, surely he had done more than enough. But McCampbell refused to ask his men to take risks he was unwilling to face himself. He believed that a leader should be on the front line, sharing the dangers and setting the tone. It was a philosophy that inspired loyalty and performance in equal measure. It's worth noting that McCampbell's aerial victories were not merely about racking up numbers. Each one was a high-stakes contest of skill, reaction, and survival. The enemy pilots he faced were often experienced, motivated, and desperate. McCampbell's success came from reading the fight as it unfolded, staying a step ahead, and knowing when to press the attack or break away. He rarely wasted ammunition. He knew the limitations of his guns and his plane. And he respected his opponents, even as he shot them down. There was no room for arrogance in McCampbell's cockpit, only the drive to outthink and outfly the enemy. One of the most extraordinary parts of McCampbell's wartime experience was how he remained uninjured throughout his combat career. Despite flying over 130 missions and engaging in more than 20 major dogfights, he never took serious damage in the air or suffered a crash landing. It was a testament to his awareness, discipline, and control. Many of his fellow aces were wounded or killed. McCampbell credited his survival to a mix of good judgment and good fortune, but his fellow pilots often pointed to something more, his almost uncanny ability to stay composed, assess threats, and make the right move under pressure. As the war drew to a close in 1945, McCampbell found himself back in the United States, lauded as a national hero. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, the Navy Cross, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, and multiple Distinguished Flying Crosses. These honors reflected not just his kill count, but the strategic impact of his actions. He had led from the front, defeated dozens of enemy aircraft, and protected the ships and sailors of the U.S. Pacific Fleet with unflinching resolve. His name was etched into the annals of American military history. Still, he wore these honors lightly. McCampbell never allowed fame to affect his character. When young men asked for advice, he talked about training, teamwork, and making smart choices, not glory or medals. He reminded them that war was unforgiving and that success in combat depended on humility and discipline as much as courage. In an era that sometimes celebrated the lone wolf or the daring rebel, McCampbell represented something different, the consummate professional who led by example and earned the respect of peers through action, not words. In the years following the war, McCampbell's story began to take on new meaning. As the United States transitioned into a new global power during the Cold War, his model of steady leadership and technical excellence became even more relevant. Military academies studied his tactics. Documentarians told his story. Veterans groups honored his legacy. And perhaps most importantly, young pilots across the country were inspired by the quiet confidence of the man who had once faced down 60 enemy aircraft and returned victorious. McCampbell's legacy endured because it was rooted in more than just numbers. He had been part of a defining moment in naval aviation, a time when victory depended not just on technology but on the skill and resolve of the individual pilot. He had lived through the transformation of the carrier strike group from a support element to the dominant force in modern naval warfare. And he had helped shape that transformation with every mission he flew, every pilot he trained, and every command decision he made. Through it all, McCampbell remained grounded. He didn't chase celebrity or politics. He focused instead on the next task, the next generation, the next lesson to pass on. He understood the burden of being a hero, and he carried it with grace. In the final chapters of David McCampbell's life, the world around him had changed dramatically from the days when he soared above the Pacific in a Hellcat fighter. The generation of World War II veterans had become elder statesmen, their deeds memorialized in history books, documentaries, and monuments. Yet McCampbell never sought to position himself above others. He always insisted that his accomplishments were part of a collective struggle. He said time and again that the young men who launched off carrier decks, the crewmen who fueled and armed the planes, the signal officers, the mechanics, all were equally essential to victory. As his health began to decline in the 1990s, McCampbell remained active in veterans events and continued to speak to audiences about the lessons of war. His speeches were never boastful. He spoke about preparation, dedication, and the value of remaining calm in the face of danger. One of his most often repeated messages was the importance of doing your duty with humility. He didn't romanticize combat, nor did he glorify violence. For him, war had always been a burden as much as a responsibility, and he believed it was something only to be entered into with grave seriousness. He spent much of his time in his later years living quietly in Florida, where he enjoyed time with his wife and family. Though many journalists and historians sought to write his biography, McCampbell often deferred or downplayed the importance of his own story. He believed the war had been a team effort, and that too often public attention focused on individuals when so many had given everything without ever being recognized. It was this humility that set him apart even from other heroes of his time. In 1996, David McCampbell passed away at the age of 86. The news was received with quiet reverence in military communities across the United States and beyond. His funeral was attended by fellow aviators, naval officers, historians, and family members, all of whom shared a profound respect for the man who had done so much for his country without ever seeking anything in return. He was buried with full military honors, his name remembered not just for what he had done, but for how he had done it, with grace, courage, and a complete absence of vanity. After his passing, tributes poured in. The United States Navy officially recognized his unmatched contributions, and his story was featured in museums, books, and educational exhibits. The National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida, displays artifacts and exhibits dedicated to his career, including the iconic F-6F Hellcat. Many of his personal items were preserved, including medals, flight logs, and photographs from the war. These objects serve not just as reminders of his service but as teaching tools for future generations of military aviators. Perhaps the most significant posthumous tribute came in 2002, when the U.S. Navy commissioned the USS McCampbell, DDG-85, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer named in his honor. The ship's motto, "Relentless in Battle," captured the very spirit of McCampbell's combat record and leadership. From its launch, the USS McCampbell carried with it the memory of a man who had once fought alone against impossible odds and emerged victorious. Every sailor who served aboard that ship did so in the name of one of the most accomplished and admired pilots in American naval history. Today, McCampbell's name stands as a permanent part of the Navy's identity. New generations of pilots learn about his engagements not just as tales of bravery, but as blueprints of aerial warfare. His tactics are dissected in military academies. His cool-headed leadership is cited in command training. His example is held up as a reminder of what it means to lead by doing, not by declaring. He never sought to define himself through speeches or promotions. He defined himself through action. What made McCampbell's story endure is the balance he struck between exceptional skill and deep humility. He could have chosen to step back from the war after becoming an ace. He could have turned his achievements into a political career or a public persona. But he chose to stay in the fight, to lead from the front, and to ensure that others were trained, prepared, and supported. His greatest pride came not from decorations, but from the knowledge that he had kept others alive, completed his missions, and upheld the standards of the U.S. Navy. It's easy to reduce war heroes to statistics, victory counts, medals earned, missions flown. But McCampbell's story resists simplification. He was a man of immense ability, yes, but also a man of reflection. He understood the weight of taking life, the cost of battle, and the value of human connection. He built a squadron not just through orders, but through trust. He protected lives not only with bullets, but with wisdom and leadership. That is why his story still resonates. In a time when so many stories are told for dramatic effect or inflated legend, McCampbell's truth stands on its own. The dogfights happened. The 9 kills in one flight happened. The calm voice over the radio as Japanese Zeros closed in happened. And yet, the man himself never let those moments define him beyond his commitment to duty. He would have told you that anyone in his position would have done the same. But the truth is, very few could have done what he did. Even fewer would have done it without ever demanding praise. For those who study World War II, McCampbell remains one of the most compelling figures of the Pacific theater. His story intersects with major operations, Saipan, Guam, the Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, and his fingerprints are on some of the most decisive aerial battles in naval history. He exemplified the effectiveness of the carrier strike model, the evolution of naval aviation tactics, and the endurance of American resolve during the most intense phases of the conflict. Yet even outside of military circles, McCampbell's life has meaning. He represents the kind of character that transcends war, a person who worked hard, led fairly, stayed grounded, and never let success change who he was. His journey from a young cadet in Alabama to the top Navy ace of the Second World War is one of quiet determination, relentless effort, and deep humanity. As time moves forward and the events of World War II fade further into history, names like David McCampbell remind us that courage is not always loud, that heroism can be found in consistency and composure, and that the greatest legacies are built not just by what you do, but by how you do it. His life is a lesson in service without ego, achievement without arrogance, and leadership without bravado. His story will continue to be told in classrooms, hangars, and flight decks around the world. And every time a naval aviator launches from the deck of a carrier, scanning the sky with purpose and pride, part of David McCampbell's legacy flies with them, an enduring reminder of the man who once ruled the skies with a steady hand, a fierce heart, and a soul devoted to his country.